China, officially the PRC, People's Republic of China, is an Eastern Asian country with a population of 1.4 billion. It is notable for its history, its traditions, its culture, its architecture and its production, but most notably for its language. Chinese has got two script variants, what is called the mainland Chinese region, that is the Chinese territory excluding the also Chinese-speaking Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan, mostly uses simplified Chinese, as opposed to traditional Chinese in the latter. Having such a large country with such an immense amount of people and such a huge economy, entering the Chinese markets is always a desirable project for many companies. Gaming companies have often been particularly interested in getting their consoles and games on this market, not only because of the potential immense benefit, but also to fight the constant amount of mod chips and knockups.
Granddad! Flintstones?
However, getting video games in the Chinese market has historically been hell. China used to see, and to some degree still sees, video games as some sort of addicting drug that to this day is heavily regulated. But let's travel all the way back. Let's go back to the early 2000s. The early 2000s were a fantastic time for video games, with new consoles coming out, such as the PlayStation 2, the Sega Dreamcast, the Xbox, the Game Boy Advance, and the Nintendo GameCube. That is, unless you were a Chinese gaming fan. In June 2000, the Chinese Council passed a bill made specifically for video games that completely banned production, import, and sale of anything considered a gaming console or an arcade machine, as a response to the concern regarding addiction and negative influence on young people from video games. This ban was aimed at gaming consoles but not PC games or mobile games, which meant that these became extremely popular in China until the end of the ban in 2015. However, not all hope was lost. According to Sony's president during a conference in Shanghai, Sony was willing to try to get the PlayStation 2 out in China. Sony was not worried about piracy, rather about the government. They had to figure out a way to market the PS2 as literally anything that didn't say, "This is a gaming console." And thus, Sony labeled the console as a computer entertainment system, which did the trick, and it was set to finally release in 2003, but was delayed due to issues with the government's policies. They finally released the PlayStation 2 on New Year's 2004, but now a second challenge appeared, releasing games for it, every single one of which needed approval for the government as well. In the end, they were only able to get 10 games out in China. The PlayStation 2 was discontinued in China for just 1 year, due to the absolute disaster and poor sales caused by the situation. However, Sony wasn't the only contestant to this gaming ban in the early 2000s. There was another company willing to give it a shot. Can you guess? Nintendo had already partnered with the Hong Kong toy company Mani to sell their products in mainland China. Nintendo understood that the Chinese market had a great potential, but also that, especially since the ban, it wasn't safe to play on, so they left Mani in charge of moving the pieces for them. But in 2002, right after Satoru Iwata became the president of Nintendo, and after Sony's announcement regarding their interest in releasing the PS2 in China was all over, the company changed its partnership with Mani to Hong Kong only, and planned something new for China. Meet Wei Yan, a Taiwanese-born American technologist and entrepreneur. He moved to the United States and led businesses in Silicon Valley, later shifting towards working on lots of notable technology-related fields, such as OpenGL development or the GPU used by the GameCube and the Wii. But in 2001, he became interested in the other side of the world. Jen partnered with Nintendo to make a company specialized in localizing Nintendo products for the Chinese market, which wasn't truly founded until the 6th of December 2002. Created as a joint venture between Nintendo and Wei Yan, this little company was named iQue. China finally had its official settlement with Nintendo. iQue started as a company that would build Nintendo products with the Chinese market in mind to get around the restrictions and to finally give Chinese Nintendo fans a possibility of playing games in their language without having to resort to importing or fan translations. But you see, the history of IQ is much, much more complicated than you think. Due to China's restrictions and unreliability, not everything was as straightforward as creating a company, localizing, and releasing. So IQ would constantly deal with issues to get Nintendo out officially in China, to combat a censoring government, to give the world's most spoken language a place in Nintendo products. But after all these years, IQ has not only been a legacy of localization and an interesting piece of Nintendo history, but also a remarkable challenge for video game preservation and overall a mystery for research, including the unreleased IQE that we're still trying to find to this day. If you are remotely interested in anything I've just mentioned, I propose you get ready, as we launch into one of the most mysterious and interesting bits of Nintendo history. My name is Luna, and this is the history of Nintendo in China and the mystery of the lost IQE. To better understand IQ, we need to know its history. Right after its creation, when the team began to investigate the best way to introduce Nintendo to the Chinese market. Back then, people believed IQ would release a Chinese version of the GameCube, which was the most recent Nintendo home console back then, to compete against Sony's PlayStation 2. But this wasn't quite the case, because despite being in the year 2002, IQ decided to release a Nintendo console that was already far behind at that point. And that is none other than the Nintendo 64. When this was announced, Chinese Nintendo fans were losing their minds, not interested in a console from the past. However, the low cost of its production, the requirement for the console to be cheap, the need to slow down China's rampant piracy, and the fact that Wei Yan was most familiar with the Nintendo 64, and the sufficiency of this console for the average Chinese family who just wants to have fun with games, were IQ's reasons to attempt its first stint with a console that was already 7 years old. The Chinese version of the Nintendo 64 was revealed at the Tokyo Game Show, and it shocked everyone, let's say. This is the IQ player. People weren't sure if this was the controller or the console itself. Its design was nothing short of genius. The device is both the console and the controller. It would be connected to the television. The system was essentially a modified Nintendo 64 designed to circumvent the Chinese government's restrictions, and it was released on the 17th of November 2003, officially making it the first iQue release. It cost only 498 RMB, or 50 euro at the time, making it much cheaper than other consoles or imports. The iQue player plays Nintendo 64 games, but the way they were distributed was rather special. Instead of inserting cartridges for games, you would insert a flash card called the iQue card. The flash card that comes with the system contains Dr. Mario 64 in limited time limits for all the games. To download the full versions or the games, players had to visit game stores that served iQue tickets and use the iQue depot to download the games to an iQue card, and then the games were there to be enjoyed. This was a bit too complicated to get new games, so in 2004 the iQue at-home service was released, which allowed users to connect the iQue player to their computer with a USB cable and use a computer application to purchase games through the internet without having to walk to the depot, similarly to Wii Point cards on the Wii Shop channel, then copy them to their flash card. It also allowed for updating the console, and online multiplayer and chat were planned but never realized. Wei Jian had an interesting plan for iQue. He made it clear that, in China, there are two groups of possible customers. A 5% of gaming fans who know all about gaming outside China and are likely to afford more expensive stuff and imports, and the 95% who consider video games something arduous and complicated. iQue was mostly focused towards this second group. The iQue player did not offer Nintendo's latest games, and it wasn't an expensive console made for gamers. Rather, it was a simple, parent-friendly device. The strategy was to show how video games can help improve children's mental and social development. However, this whole design had plenty of clear flaws. The iQue player only supported one player from the factory, requiring a multiplayer box to be purchased for more. According to Wei Jian, his ultimate goal was to get the iQue player to sell 1 million units. But how did Nintendo's first step in China go? Well, at the time of discontinuation, the iQue player had sold an amazing less than 12,000 units. An absolute financial disaster. The console sold so poorly that other consoles that iQue was working on, such as a Chinese release of the Nintendo GameCube, had to be cancelled because the production costs were more than the gains. The last game released for the console was Animal Crossing in 2006, which is interesting as it did not release anywhere outside Japan. Interestingly, many of the iQue player systems produced that were not sold in China were sold to other countries like Russia, where, despite the language barrier, it worked out better due to its cheap price. Plus, the iQue player wasn't entirely a failure, as it internally remains a super interesting machine. It will forever remain Nintendo's first attempt of a long journey of Chinese localization, as a console many speedrunners are seeking to buy nowadays due to its faster load times and text scrolling speeds, and as a phenomenon that was extremely far ahead of its time by trying out digital video game downloads. Although the iQue player only had a small library, the games had high quality localizations. Star Fox 64 had complete Mandarin voice acting.
来自皮迫将军的消息非常重要。
帮帮我们火狐战队！安德鲁斯正式宣战了，他已经入侵莱拉特星系了，企图控制整个克尼利亚。我们的部队无法独立完成这个任务，快来呀，火狐！
And Animal Crossing was not only entirely translated, which is admirable for such a text-heavy game, but its inclusion of traditional Chinese festivals amazed many players. iQue had misunderstood the market, as well as the Chinese government's game approval system, which remains an absolute pain to get through. Originally, there were even plans to release a localized game every month, but it ended up with some games such as The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, which can be found in the back of the console's packaging, being completely unreleased. The digital download system was going to be employed on all of the company's future releases, but this had to be all cancelled, making iQue at home only ever used by the iQue player. However, this was only the beginning. It was far from the end of iQue's history, as just a year later, they would aim for their very different second release. Despite the disaster of iQ's first console in June 2004, they shot towards their first handheld, the iQ Game Boy Advance, or iQ GBA. It was released with Chinese versions of Super Mario Advanced and Wario Land 4, and unlike the iQ player, this console was a simple Chinese version of the GBA. This means that the console's design is almost identical to the other regions, only that it was released by iQ, not Nintendo. Unfortunately, only 8 Chinese games were ever released for the console. There were 12 other iQ GBA games made, but they were not released because they feared they would get pirated immediately and uploaded into the internet, and because of custom Chinese translation ROM hacks being already widely available. Thankfully, thanks to the preservationist TouchMet2, these unreleased Chinese localizations were dumped and preserved, so they can now be enjoyed by anyone. Although the console offered few localized games, the iQ GBA was completely region-free, which meant that players could buy the console for extremely cheap without needing to import, but they could still play games imported from Japan, Europe, or America, and even ROM hacks and flash cuts if they so desired. The iQ GBA was also perfect in the sense that it wasn't just a home console, and that it can be taken anywhere to play on the go. iQ also started to host several official events, notably one where they asked players to make their own designs for the upcoming iQ GBA SP, which had over 700 submissions which were voted for by over 100,000 participants. The SP was released in October 2004, and on top of it, iQ also released the iQ Game Boy Micro in October 2005. China's gamers started to have faith in iQ. Thanks to all of this, many decided to buy the iQ GBA instead of importing or buying a bootleg for the first time. After the poor sales of the iQ player, by contrast, the iQ GBA sold over 500,000 units. Its open-minded design had truly made it work out extremely well. But while the iQ GBA was flourishing in China, Nintendo had just announced their latest handheld. It was set to become Nintendo's best-selling console, and iQ quickly put plans to release it in China, while the iQ GBA continued to be a success. And so, the iQ DS was released in July 2005. But something important to keep in mind about this release is that, while the iQ DS can play both iQ DS and regular Nintendo DS games, regular Nintendo DS consoles cannot play iQ DS games. This, along with a cheaper price, intended to show customers that the iQ DS was preferable to simply importing a DS. Unfortunately though, iQ predicted that the DS would not be too successful, so they sent out a smaller stock of iQ DS consoles. This meant that customers could only find very few of them in the shops, and the few that were available were way too expensive. Thankfully, all this changed when iQ released the iQ DS Lite in June 2006, when the sales were revived due to a growing popularity in the console and to much better advertising of the system in public media. Hopes for this revision to sell well were high, as none other than Nintendo's president Satoru Iwata traveled to Shanghai along with Wei Yan to attend the release of the iQ DS Lite. Both iQ DS models will end up selling over 300,000 units. Interestingly, iQ also developed a few cool projects of their own, such as the iQ Netcard. The Netcard was a physical flashcard with a CPU that was able to connect to the internet and would allow players to download games similar to the iQ player. But another remarkable feature that the Netcard would have was online multiplayer. iQ made several online games such as Poker and Kenki, along with an iQ Lobby which would allow users to listen to music and chat. There were also plans to add online support to other games such as Mario Kart and Pokemon. But unfortunately, all of this had to be cancelled, partially due to the impracticality and complexity of this. But not all was lost, as much of the work made for this device resulted very useful for the making of the Wii's iOS. The Netcard was cancelled in 2008, and in the end, the iQ DS only saw 5 released games. New Super Mario Bros. Was notable for having released all the way in July 2009. It was so late that modders had already made a fan translation of the game long before the release of the official iQ DS version, and despite there being an official translation to the game now, most Chinese ROM download sites today still offer the old French translation, which is simply hilarious. In case you can't tell by now, French translations have played a key role in Chinese video games. Both the GBA and the DS have got a ton of them, even, and many of them are really high quality. Another interesting fact is that there were, once again, unreleased games. The Chinese version of Vic Brain Academy is one of them, which we can see for a few seconds in an iQDS trailer. There was also an unreleased Chinese version for Nintendogs, which we'll hear back from in a while. In fact, it was around this time that iQue slowed down its game releases, eventually stopping entirely. Now, you might be wondering, why has iQue officially released so few games? Well, first, piracy was a whole issue. After a console was hacked, releasing a game meant having it be in piracy sites in mere days. iQue started to contact download sites to take down the downloads, request retailers to not sell flashcards, and ask gamers to support genuine game releases. And plus, in many cases, many games already had popular French translations, which may have made even games not yet worked on by iQue remain unreleased. But the main issue wasn't even any of that. You see, in China, even to this day, to release a game you need an official government approval. These approvals are notorious for being slow and painful. An approval would take about 3 months, then if the censors needed some translations or anything in the game changed, the approval after these changes took 3 other months, and so on. Most notably, back then video games were completely foreign to the staff who had to approve them, since they were only used to other forms of media such as films. So this was a total chaos. But don't worry, because the worst part is yet to be unveiled. In 2006, Nintendo had released what would become its most popular home console, the Wii. A console that would bring to life to motion controls, the most enjoyable online services, and some of the greatest titles like Wii Sports, Mario Kart Wii, and Wii Fit. iQue had not released a home console since the iQue Player, so as the console was a smash hit since the beginning and it had lots of potential, it was obvious that iQue was going to put its maximum support on it. iQue staff started to set up stuff for it right after its launch, and they announced that they had plans to release an iQue Wii for China. In December 2007, the iQue Wii got the 3C certification approval by the Chinese government, a certificate that is given to electronic products that are deemed safe to sell. And so, iQue announced that the console would release at some point in 2008. After iQue got the license for Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, plans changed to release it and market it before the Olympics, which were taking place that year in Beijing, the capital of China. By early 2008, Chinese localizations of Wii Sports and Wii Play were complete, with Super Mario Galaxy and Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games almost finished. As many more companies started supporting the console, the iQue Wii was building up to be the company's biggest release. There was a rumor that the iQue Wii would release in May 2008, but unfortunately that never happened. As Chinese Wii fans continued to wait, the excitement resparked for a brief while. In July 2008, Nintendo released the Wii in Taiwan. Taiwanese Wiis are mostly the exact same as Japanese Wiis, and they only play Japanese games. However, there were a few Chinese language games released under the Japanese region, and these translations were made by none other than iQue. A traditional Chinese version of Wii Sports, Wii Fit, and Wii Play were released for Taiwanese and Japanese owners. This was huge in Taiwan and later Hong Kong, as these were the first major traditional Chinese localizations they were getting from Nintendo. What made this so exciting is that these were actually modifications of the yet-to-be-released iQue Wii versions, just that they were adapted to be traditional Chinese instead of simplified Chinese, because if you recall, it's the variant spoken in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau. In fact, the voice actors for the Wii Fit trainers and the balance board, Liya, Shandoi, and Sun Chang, are actually mainland Chinese speakers, despite the fact that they're using vocabulary of the Taiwanese dialect. This means that these would also be the voice actors in the iQue version of the game. Back to China, news of the iQue remains completely quiet. But in August 2008, as the iQue still remained unreleased, a player in Qingdao noted the shopping center in the city had available pre-orders for the iQue, and they posted this picture of it on the internet. This picture gave everyone waiting for the console tons of excitement, so when the media called the shop, they mentioned that a Wii with the game would cost 2300 RMB, about 195 euro. Well, there was no official release date, everything seemed ready for the iQOO Wii, which felt like it was finally about to release. Except it didn't. Not in 2008, not in 2009, not in 2010. The Wii in China was never heard of. It was not released. It remains completely lost. According to a former employee, there were about 10 games, as well as the firmware and channels completely translated into simplified Chinese, and all of these remain lost media. The closest we have to these games to this day are the Taiwanese versions of the games, most of which were built from the iQOO Wii translations and were likely released as an attempt to save the Wii in the Chinese-speaking region, even if it isn't much help to the issue. But why didn't the iQOO Wii release a console that had such a large support and work put into it? After all, the iQOO Wii had obtained a certificate, a license for the Olympic Games, tons of developer support, and a completely set up server for online connections. What's failed? Well, can you guess? In 2008, the Chinese government really tightened its regulations, and video game approvals became much longer. The iQOO Wii continued to await approval for the government, as the Olympics were long finished and iQOO lost any hope of getting sales in the chance that it actually ended up releasing. iQOO was a huge target of this restriction after the government was skeptical of it being a foreign company, because while the iQOO player was entirely made in China, the Wii was not much else than a Japanese console imported and modified. This is best understood to something that I find simultaneously depressing and hilarious. Did you know the V? That one Chinese console that was a knockoff of the Wii? To add insult to injury, that was approved by the government and released. Meanwhile, the legitimate iQOO Wii continued to await approval. After this whole disappointment, it seemed like that year was the end of what once was so great for iQOO. The NetCard was completely cancelled, word about the iQOO Wii went completely silent, Wii imports and mod chips were rampant, and Weijian resigned, handing to Nintendo the entire company, which became one of its subsidiaries. From a perspective of video game preservation, localization activism, and just Nintendo fans as a whole, this is an absolute disgrace, but it is what tends to be found in China. Due to China's approval and restrictions system, many developers struggle to release their products due to its policies, hitting indie developers the hardest. This was not the end for iQOO, but it clearly showed where the company, along with China's gaming approvals, were headed to, and this will forever remain, as far as I'm aware, one of the biggest cases of lost media in Nintendo history. Such a huge effort in giving Chinese gamers its best home console, completely finished, supported to the highest extent, was all broken after the worst possible forecast for the iQOO Wii had become reality. The good ending of the story is the beginning of traditional Chinese localizations for Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau, with 8 traditional Chinese Wii games, and the iQOO's development work on the iQOO Wii resulted useful for the making of the Korean Wii. Either way, iQOO is now 100% owned by Nintendo, but this would not stop the releases. Although the Wii had miserably failed to launch, the company would positively aim for what would be the next releases. While this whole mess was going on, over in Japan, Nintendo had just released their newest handheld, the Nintendo DSi. As a huge enhancement to the Nintendo DS, this system included a menu featuring several apps, such as the Nintendo DSi camera, but it also introduced DSiWare, a system similar to WiiWare, where Nintendo and other third parties could release digital exclusive games to the Nintendo DSi shop. The popularity of the iQOO DS and the opportunities of the new DSiWare made this console seem like a great idea to work on after the Wii disaster. And so, in December 2009, iQOO successfully released the iQOO DSi, its first release since Nintendo was in charge of the company. Something peculiar about the iQOO DSi is that it actually comes with a game pre-installed, and that is Nintendogs. Remember how I mentioned earlier that this translation was finished and approved for release all the way back in 2006 along with Big Brain Academy? Well, unlike the latter, here was Nintendox 3 years later, pre-installed with the system. IQ would choose one game to bundle with the system, either this or New Super Mario Bros., and they chose to throw in the first because of its simplicity, and because it was the one that they wanted to see pirated the least. Imports and flash cuts were way more affordable on the IQ DSi, but Nintendox, along with an increased investment in marketing, may very well have been what saved the IQ DSi. Something to note was also the work of Dentsu. Dentsu is a Japanese international advertising company that Nintendo had already worked on for console advertising and marketing since the GameCube, and that they collaborated with for the creation of some services like Wii. In this case, Nintendo put them in charge of marketing in China for the IQ DSi. They followed an advertisement and marketing system that was pretty similar to the one they had been using in Japan and Korea, which proved to be rather successful. Also something interesting, remember how IQ DS games only worked on IQ DS consoles and not on other region DS systems? Well, other regions' DSi systems support IQ DS games with no problem at all, so that's convenient. Now, after this, there were no new DS or DSi cartridge games released, possibly because Nintendo, which now control IQ, did not want to test the waters with piracy and government approval issues. But IQ worked to take advantage of the new IQ DSi shop, the Chinese version of the Nintendo DSi shop. A total of 31 IQ DSiWare games were released, with big titles such as Dr. Mario, English Training, WarioWare, and Brain Training. But the majority of them did not sell well at all. But there was also a completely original DSiWare game from IQ called The Seer, which was a freeware game that was not much else than a modified version of the homonymous fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. This game became a complete running joke due to the absurdly huge amount of advertising IQ was giving it. By 2011, the Nintendo 3DS had just been released in Japan, and over in China, all you heard about from IQ was this DSiWare game about a fairy tale. And what happened after this is beyond belief. In 2012, Nintendo announced Mario Party 9 would be released in traditional Chinese almost immediately after the original release. There was still some hope for Chinese localizations, as Nintendo Futen, Nintendo's Taiwanese branch, independently from IQ, started to get working on tons of translations. Meanwhile in China, The Seer was still the only thing going on. Everyone thought the DSi was the final product from IQ, and that such a long legend was completely done for, and that they would not release any more products. But all of this changed after Nintendo announced that Nintendo 3DS would release officially for Taiwan and Hong Kong, and the IQ 3DS was coming to China. Everyone started to think that Nintendo was finally going to give a damn about the Chinese-speaking regions. The release of the IQ 3DS had some potential from IQ, as it was a completely new console that had not been hacked yet, and thus piracy was out of the picture. When the IQ 3DS XL released in China in December 2012, it had two games pre-installed, Super Mario 3D Land and Mario Kart 7, both in simplified Chinese. Mario Kart 7 was notable for having a completely open online play that allowed Chinese players to finally access Nintendo's online play after Mario Kart Wii failed to release. The 3DS was the first fully region-locked handheld, the only exception being DS cartridges, which continue to be region-free. The IQ 3DS was region-locked, so it could not play imports from other regions. There were no physical IQ 3DS games ever released, possibly to avoid piracy and having to mess with game approvals. But the console does have a cartridge slot, not only for DS games, but for another cool little thing. It is quite confusing, but I'll try my best to explain. You see, the Taiwan and Hong Kong version of the 3DS had lots and lots of completely localized physical games released in traditional Chinese, but Nintendo had a nice up their sleeve. A bunch of these traditional Chinese versions had a special feature that made them work on the IQ 3DS, and they included a simplified Chinese version within the cartridge that would be activated when the game is run on an IQ 3DS. These simplified Chinese translations were made by IQ themselves. This meant that you could import a Taiwanese 3DS game, and not only would it work on your IQ 3DS console, but it would also display simplified Chinese text. For IQ 3DS owners to find these, Importers then threw many of them into Chinese markets like Taobao. Through this technique, many more 3DS games were available in simplified Chinese, including The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D, Nintendo's Boss Cats, Star Fox 64 3D, Mario Tennis Open, New Super Mario Bros. 2, Dr. Kawashima's Devil Sprint Training, Pokemon Sun and Moon, Luigi's Mansion 2, and Paper Mario Sticker Star. Nintendo's Chinese language branches started to flourish, within capabilities at least. While iQue wasn't releasing any games and let Nintendo's traditional Chinese branch do all the publishing, at least the latter was still getting plenty of games out. Nintendo had finally got themselves together with localizations in Chinese after all these years. That is, until they didn't. Nintendo Futen, the subsidiary in charge of the traditional Chinese region, suddenly stopped releasing games. This was a problem not because there were no more Chinese language games, but because the Taiwanese 3DS was region locked. New games could not be played at all if they weren't from the traditional Chinese region. This meant that new customers started to simply import Japanese consoles as it was more worth it. So Nintendo started to release games from other regions, sometimes in Japanese, sometimes in English, exclusively through the Nintendo eShop. But this was not enough, as many users didn't understand these languages, or some were only able to purchase games physically. And even then, many new 3DS games that people wanted to play were not released for the traditional Chinese region at all. This meant that a lot of shops started to offer Japanese imports because they ended up being more worth it, which caused a huge mess where there were 2 region consoles on sale at the same time, leaving people even more confused about which one to buy. The traditional Chinese 3DS only had 23 physical games released, only 14 in Chinese. After Nintendo Futen had almost entirely killed the Taiwanese gaming market, and Nintendo was financially suffering due to the Wii U's poor sales, it was closed entirely by May 2014, and the subsidiary was changed to Nintendo Hong Kong. The low amount of games in China meant that people were starting to import as well, and you'll rarely hear of anyone in China who actually owns an iQue 3DS. Especially after modders figured out the console and started to release hundreds of fan translations for new games. And the worst was yet to come. Just a year after the release of the iQue 3DS, the console lost its product approval, stopping production entirely. It sold only 10,000 units. After Pokemon X and Y was announced to not be released in Chinese, that was it. That was the death of Chinese Nintendo. And yes, trust me, it gets worse. In 2016, what Nintendo did was beyond anyone's comprehension. They released the 3DS in the traditional Chinese region, again, and it was done in probably the worst way imaginable. The new 3DS was called a Starter 3DS. It is just a Japanese 3DS that plays Japanese 3DS games, but it has most wireless features removed to prevent this region from accessing the Japanese region services. This console can still be connected to the internet for updates, but what it did is just that the EULA cannot be accepted and is instead replaced with the English message, "This is not available to this Nintendo 3DS." If you use Homebrew to mark the EULA as accepted, all of these services become available. Yes, I'm serious. The worst thing about this console is that it only plays Japanese games. Those who bought Taiwanese games could not play them here anymore. People in Taiwanese forums started to tell others this model was a scam and not worth it at all, despite its cheaper price. And to make matters even worse, in 2017, Nintendo re-released the traditional Chinese version of Super Mario 3D Land only for the newer Japanese consoles. Try to make sense of that. And sometimes the fix was worse. Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon were released in traditional Chinese for the newer Japanese consoles, and then there was another cartridge version released for those who wanted to play it on the original Taiwanese consoles from all the way back. There were 2 versions of these games out there, causing even more confusion. But hey, the good news? It finally had a simplified Chinese translation, and the Taiwanese cartridge was compatible with the iQue 3DS all those years after. Dear Lord. In 2014, the Chinese government had just released a statement with some good news. Foreign companies were now allowed to build and sell products in Shanghai, which was a sign that they were opening up the video games. And in July 2015, the historical 15-year gaming ban was lifted. According to a statement from the Chinese Ministry of Culture, companies like Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft could now manufacture and sell video game consoles anywhere around the country. Sony and Microsoft took advantage of this from day one. The Xbox One was released in China around September 14, and the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation Vita were released in March 2015. Nintendo, however, did not reckon this and had no plans to release the Wii U in the country. The then president of Nintendo of America, Reggie Fils-Aimé, mentioned that China was an interesting location for product releases after the lift of the ban, and Satoru Iwata explained that they planned to design a new game console for China, something that had already been done 11 years earlier. It was around 2015 when Nintendo started to get into the mobile phone markets and announced they had plans for a new console, then called the Nintendo NX. Chinese fans started to wonder what would happen with this console in China after the ban had been lifted, and started to get excited for what would be the first proper Chinese release of a Nintendo console. However, that year something utterly tragic happened. On the 11th of July 2015, Nintendo reported the passing of its president, Satoru Iwata. Memorials were established all around the world. He would forever be remembered as someone who truly understood video games, and as the genius that managed to make the great appeal of the DS and the Wii, and expand from the gaming markets to what it is today. Also remarkably, IQ was founded in the year Satoru Iwata reached the role of president of Nintendo, and its last products and announcements had taken place all before his passing. As the IQ DSi shop was shut down on the 4th of November 2016, this left the future of the company completely uncertain. In 2016, Nintendo announced their new console, the Nintendo Switch. There was no news about what to expect in the Chinese-speaking regions, but a hugely celebrated announcement was that the console would be the first Nintendo home console to not be region-locked. The console was released on the 3rd of March 2017, and many games were announced to feature both simplified and traditional Chinese options, like Super Mario Odyssey and Fire Emblem. The Switch was released in Taiwan in December 2017. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was announced to also support both languages in early 2018, and the console started to become extremely popular in China, where fans could import the console and play it in that language. This is all it took. Original Chinese regions were made by Nintendo Hong Kong, but what I find amazing is that the simplified Chinese translations, to this day, are made by none other than IQ. Here it was, presented as yet another of Nintendo's localization subsidiaries like Nintendo Germany or Nintendo Italy, but with a large background that many people are simply not aware of. Through firmware update 7.0, the Switch menus were now entirely available in both Chinese variants, and the console just kept growing in popularity. Nintendo had finally started to get their stuff together with Chinese. Later, in 2019, Nintendo announced a partnership with Tencent to release the Nintendo Switch officially in China. The Chinese Switch would be very different from the global one. Chinese Nintendo games would be different to the global ones, and the simplified Chinese translation would be different to the one from the global version to meet Chinese government regulations. Tencent Nintendo Switch consoles can't play global games, but global consoles will throw an error when inserting a Tencent Chinese cartridge. The Chinese Switch has been selling extremely well, with games like Ring Fit Adventure blowing up after the pandemic began. Some games like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, released in China in March 2020, are a very good example of comparison between the standard IQ translation for the global version and the Tencent version. Much of the text, such as the placement numbers and the start and signs, are in Chinese, as opposed to the usual English, presumably to make government approval easier and faster. And unlike Mario Kart 7, the online here is exclusive to players from Tencent Switch consoles. And here is where the history of Chinese Nintendo stands today, at least as of writing. From the poor beginnings of the IQ player to a censored Nintendo Switch doing numbers. But most importantly, Nintendo finally cares about Chinese. Most new first-party titles are entirely playable in Chinese, remarkably text-heavy games like Animal Crossing New Horizons. Nobody knows what the future holds for Chinese-speaking Nintendo fans, but it started to look brighter. But, you see, this is not really the end. We can go deeper. While iQue has got an undeniably large amount of unreleased games and content, the biggest remaining mystery was definitely the iQue Wii, a completely finished but unreleased console. And so, many fans, researchers, and video game preservationists began to look at it, investigate it, find what could be found. There was a huge desire to recover as much as possible from this completely unreleased system. And so... Dear viewer, I have told you the making of iQue's history. And now, it's time for the unearthing of this history. After the iQue Wii went completely missing, people started doing as much as possible to give the Wii a place in China, even if the console itself was unreleased. The Wii has got a ton of really high quality Chinese fan translations. Groups like Cat Planet and ACG have made several custom translations to many Wii games. They are impressive to me as a modder and localizer myself, not only because of their quality and the effort they must have taken to make, but also because of the insane difficulty of modding them in. We only figured out how to text edit Wii Party in 2020, while these guys had already got a translation finished and released all the way back in 2013. And it even features custom voice lines. Although they're not official and they do not use official translation names from previous games, they are still awesome, so you should check them out if you're interested. Outside of that, on the general market, mod-chipped Wiis and burnt pirated games started to become extremely common. Many stores would sell Wiis with their own menu translation attempts, based on the Japanese and American menus, although most were not particularly high quality, and there was even one that had adverts for the shop where it was sold, replacing the French and Spanish language options. But many were interested in researching how much was actually left from the official iQue Wii. The Wii was entirely hacked between 2008 and 2009, so people started to investigate the files. First off, it was discovered that the Wii has two unused language settings before Korean, which are Simplified Chinese and Traditional Chinese. This is interesting because it shows that the Korean Wii was made after the iQue Wii. Simplified Chinese is clearly the language of the iQue Wii, but Traditional Chinese being here is strange. If you recall, the Wii had 8 Traditional Chinese games, but these are running on the Japanese region, and so the language is actually Japanese, so this language setting is unused. Perhaps they were planning to make an actual Wii for Taiwan at some point? It was also discovered that inside the folder for home menu files for many Wii games, there was one labeled CHN, and in some games it actually shows up when you launch it in the Simplified Chinese language setting. This proved that they had translated much more than just games, and many started to wonder if they had finished the Wii menu itself. And sure enough, by looking at the Wii menu files, people found a leftover iQue Wii health and safety screen and translated text data for the Wii menu and the Mi channel. Although a font was not left in the files, by creating a custom one, it was possible to try out these translations. Interestingly, the Mi channel's DS-Me sharing feature mentions the iQue DS. There weren't any iQue DS games to support this feature, but since the DS is region-free, it would have worked with non-iQue games that did support it. It would have also worked with the iQue 3DS's Mi Maker, which of course has the feature to connect the Wii removed, since the console never released, although thanks to a finding by Jinchairu, we found that it is actually unused there as well, and the button shows up by modding the Chinese text onto another region. Unfortunately, this is everything that could be obtained. There was nothing left from all the games that iQue translated. However, this would all change pretty soon. On the 30th of April 2009, a year after the original release of iQue in Japan, America, and Europe, the Korean version of the game was released, also known by its title ID, RMCK from Revolution Mario Kart and the 4-letter indicating the region. In the case of Europe, this is P for PAL, in America it's E, probably for English, and in Japan it's J. RMCK is known for being a differently more updated version of the game, with a different font and a rather different file system. But what's the most interesting is the fact that this version may have actually been built from the unreleased iQue version of Mario Kart Wii, which would be RMCC. Mario Kart Wii was one of the few iQue games that were translated by iQue but never released in traditional Chinese, as Taiwanese players used the Japanese version, and many Taiwanese Wiis even came with it, along with a translated manual for those who did not understand Japanese. But RMCC has definitely been made, and it exists, as Mario Kart Wii modders found plenty of interesting stuff from it while looking through the files of the newly released Korean version. So first off, there is a leftover, simplified Chinese strap screen, which would have been used by iQue Wii games. Here are the English, Japanese, and traditional Chinese ones by comparison. But what would have showed up after that strap screen is pretty interesting. In China, since 2003, the government requires all released games to display what is known as the Healthy Gaming Advice, 8 lines of advice text. It translates to: resist unhealthy games, refuse to pirate games, pay attention to self-protection, beware of being fooled, moderate gaming is good for the brain, excessive gaming is harmful to the body, organize your time appropriately, enjoy a healthy life. And sure enough, this advice is also left over in the files of Mario Kart Wii. Additionally, below this advice we can find the publisher information, which is the same used by all other iQue games, and an ISBN code that is all serious, presumably because it would have been replaced by the proper ISBN when the government provided. Similarly to other games, launching the game in simplified Chinese and opening the home menu shows its Chinese version, but the most interesting thing is the unused disc channel banner from the Chinese version left over next to the Korean one, which shows us the Chinese logo for the game and its official name, which naturally matches all the released games from the series. The banner from the Korean Mario Kart channel has also got an unused Chinese version. Unfortunately, none of the game's text remains available, but all of these finds are fascinating on their own. Other games like Wii Fit have also got some unused stuff. The Taiwanese version for that game, undeniably built from the iQue Wii one, has also got an unused iQue Wii channel banner. Another interesting find from it is that the iQue Wii Chinese channel installer is also entirely left over next to the normal Japanese one, which is fantastic. Mario Kart Wii also has the Chinese installer, but the name of the game is just the character G all over, meaning that it's likely nothing but dummy text. All of these are really cool finds for a console that was never released. But that's not all. There is one more thing to Mario Kart Wii that I have not mentioned yet. But before that, you need to understand how Mario Kart Wii regions work. If you've ever played a Mario Kart game online, you may know that there are usually 3 modes: Worldwide, Regional, and Friends. Worldwide throws the player in a normal worldwide game, and Friends allows them to play with friends they have registered. But through the Regional mode, the player will be matched with other players who are from their same region and who are also using this mode. For example, if I, from Europe, go on Nintendo Wi-Fi connection on Mario Kart Wii and join the Regional mode, and someone else from Europe joins it too, the server will match us and we'll play a regional room. However, if a friend from America tries to join this mode, we will never find each other due to a mismatch in region. Keep in mind, the online region is not the same as the game region, as some game regions, like the PAL version, have 2 possible online regions, in this case Europe and Australia. The game knows which to give you depending on your Wii's country setting. This region system is also taken advantage of by many Mario Kart Wii mods like CTGP Revolution, which puts all players on the same region, that being a normally unused region way higher up than the normal ones, which made it possible for only players running CTGP to find each other. Besides, if you've ever played Mario Kart Wii Online and noticed different colors under the player's name tags, the colors represent the regions of those players. So, let's go through this list of possible regions. The first one, Region 0, is Japan, and it uses the red line color. Then, Region 1 is the Americas, and it uses the blue line color. Region 2 is Europe, and it uses the green line color. Region 3 is Oceania, and it uses the yellow line color. Both Europe and Oceania use the PAL version of the game, so the game checks the consoles can present to both the player in one region or the other. Then Region 4 is Taiwan and Hong Kong, and it uses a white light color. Taiwanese and Hong Kong players use the Japanese version of the game, so similarly, this version checks the country setting and puts those who have a Taiwan or Hong Kong Wii in this region, although this is not too functional, as many of these players chose to simply import a Japanese Wii and thus would get put in the Japanese region. And when the Korean version of the game came out, added to this list was Region 5, which is Korea and uses a purple line color. These are the accessible regions of Mario Kart Wii's online play. However, there is one more little region. Region 6, China, white color. This region was sitting unused on Nintendo WFC. Clearly, it would have been accessible through the Chinese version of the game, RMCC. It is interesting to know that, similarly to Mario Kart 7, this means Mario Kart Wii would have also had worldwide online for Chinese players. Since the region is sitting unused, by hacking, anyone can access it. If several players used the cheat code to go into the unused Chinese region, they would all meet up with a chart on it. XER was the first hacker who was able to get into the Chinese region by using a cheat code on the European disk. But without any cheats or mods, the only way to access this region would be through the unreleased Chinese IQ disk. Plus, although the player's Mii characters appear in a global location or another, depending on their Wii's country and sub-region setting, players who have only set a country but not a sub-region will be put on a default location. Each region has a default location. For Japan, this is Tokyo. For the Americas, it's Washington DC in the United States. For Europe, it's Berlin in Germany. For Oceania, it's Sydney in Australia. For Taiwan and Hong Kong, it's Taipei in Taiwan. For Korea, it's Seoul. And for China, it's Beijing. But here comes the most interesting part of it. The Mario Kart channel has got a rankings feature that allows users to connect to Nintendo WFC and see time trial on competition leaderboards for their friends, the whole world, and also for their region. This means that each region has a leaderboard of players from that region, and that means the Chinese leaderboard was empty since it wasn't used. Except, it wasn't. There were some time trial ghosts laying in there. Before hackers gained access to the region, these ghosts clearly had to have been uploaded by IQ staff from a prototype IQE using a prototype of the Chinese version of the game, RMCC. Interestingly, 2 of the ghosts were uploaded by a Mii named IQ-2. These ghosts were later downloaded and examined, and what was discovered was fascinating. First, all of them had a country setting of 160, which did not exist in any released Wii. Thus, it is believed that this is the country code for China, and it confirmed that the IQE menu would not allow users to change it, similarly to the Japanese, Taiwanese, and Korean Wiis. But what's the most interesting is that the 9th place player on the Luigi Circuit leaderboard had this name. It may not seem like much, but when we display it outside the game, in a proper font, this is a name in simplified Chinese characters, which is impossible on any released Mii channel. This meant that the IQ Wii's Mii channel had actually implemented a pinyin keyboard to allow for Chinese character inputs, which would actually later be used again on the IQ 3DS. Also, from the Mii data, we can see the MAC addresses of the consoles that uploaded it, meaning we also have the MAC for many prototype IQ Wii consoles. It is absolutely amazing not only that IQ staff had actually uploaded these ghosts to the online leaderboards, but that we were able to learn this much about the IQ Wii through them. When XER found these ghosts, they created a YouTube channel called China MKW, where they uploaded some of the ghost records already present in the region, as well as those uploaded by time trialers who later accessed the region through hacks. They also uploaded a few times from the openly accessible Taiwanese leaderboards. As of making this video, this channel is still available, so look it up if you'd like to see them. Unfortunately, the Chinese leaderboard was lost after Nintendo Wi-Fi connection was discontinued on the 20th of May 2014, along with all the ghost data for the Chinese region. But thanks to Marshall's Ghost Data database, we do have the Mii files for the ghosts from Luigi Circuit, including the legendary Chinese name Mii. But that's as far as Chinese Mario Kart 8 goes. We haven't been able to find anything else, but what we learned from the release versions alone is already impressive. Going forward to 2017, the IQ Research Group YouTube channel was created to archive content from the history of IQ and Nintendo in all Chinese-speaking regions, such as trailers and recordings from games, following from the original group created in 2013 to investigate the company's history. But the following year, around June 2018, the IQ at Home service, the online service used for downloads of IQ player games, was shut down with no previous notices just after the redesign of the IQ site. Thankfully, the console had just been quickly researched by hackers in the attempt of preserving the console's games that could no longer be purchased, as well as allowing for injects and mods to be loaded on the console. In February 2018, the IQ Root team was created to document, preserve, and mod the legendary IQ player, and on the 29th of April 2018, the console was finally exploited. This was possible thanks to a soon release from years prior. Most games were dumped to allow for them to be emulated and run on regular Nintendo 64 consoles. Although due to the hardware differences introduced by the IQ player, many do not work properly, the main ones like Super Mario 64 or Mario Kart 64 seem to work mostly fine. But that year, something else happened that I deliberately avoided telling you earlier. Something very bizarre. That same year, in 2018, Nvidia's Chinese brand announced a very unexpected collaboration with Nintendo. It was announced that the Chinese version of the Nvidia Shield was going to start offering Wii games upscaled in HD. And yes, these games are what you think they are. Super Mario Galaxy, New Super Mario Bros. Wii, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, and Punch-Out Wii were all released on the Shield, completely localized in simplified Chinese. Some like Super Mario Galaxy taken from the unreleased IQ versions and upscaled into 1080p. This was absolutely amazing. While the games aren't the exact same as the original ones, as to ease the approval they added plenty of newer translations and less English text, the idea of getting to try these games after a failure of the IQ Wii blew everyone's minds, even though it required an expensive device and it had online-only DRM. Also, on Chinese Mario Galaxy, Kamek tells Mario to go to hell, which is, yeah, thanks Kamek. But the biggest ball was yet to be dropped. More games were announced to come in the future, and one of them is Mario Kart Wii. After so many years of research and documentation, this was finally happening. But such a legendary version of this game coming out after all this time wasn't even the biggest deal. Chinese Mario Kart Wii was in absolutely everyone's mouth in communities of Wii fans after it was announced that the Chinese Nvidia Shield version of Mario Kart Wii would have a completely new online mode for Chinese players, 4 years after the shutdown of Nintendo Wi-Fi connection. Lots of questions began to arise from fans, like how accessible would the service be outside of China? How moderated was it going to be? How different would it be from the original? A while later, Nvidia carried out a test on their booth at ChinaJoy, where a few players got to try out a demo version of Chinese Mario Kart Wii, showing us, after all these years, the first pictures of the legendary RMCC. Unfortunately, these pictures are all we have, but we can find a lot of exciting details. The HUD is a bit different from how it would have been on the original RMCC and from how it was on the IQ 3DS Mario Kart 7. For example, the placement numbers are just a number, and the lap and time textures are translated instead of being in English. This is similar to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's case, presumably to having less text in English being effective to speed up approval. Also, here's a couple of short videos showing gameplay. It is also likely that the Go and Finish text is translated as well, and it is possible that the POW item has the POW text modified, as this was also censored on the Tencent version of New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, although it was later changed back to the normal POW text. Also, it uses the same fonts as the Korean version, probably because it was originally for the Chinese version, but they chose to use it for Korean as well. Plus, the small buttons were changed to match the Video Shield controller. A picture of the menu shows the online and marker channel buttons are missing, probably because this was just a demo. It was originally believed to be offline only, but then Nvidia Shield announced that 12 players can play online and noted that this was no longer possible in the original version. They also mentioned that Rosalina can be unlocked for those with a Super Mario Galaxy save file, just like in the original game. Most notably, this led to people wonder if Mario Kart Wii would ever come to the Nintendo Switch, as the Nvidia Shield and the Switch both use the Tegra X1. As of writing, this hasn't happened yet, but the theory has got some value to it, as Super Mario Galaxy could release through Super Mario 3D All-Stars. It had been several months since the announcement and after the event took place. In July 2018, one more game, Donkey Kong Country Returns, was released, but Mario Kart Wii was still not out. Both Mario Kart Wii and Chinese Nintendo fans were waiting for it to be released. But there seemed to be no news for a long time, and there would never be. This is what happened. According to an interview with the developer, much like the original RMCC, the Shield version of Mario Kart Wii was completely finished. They sent it to the government for approval, who got back to them to change a few translations, and then they sent it back for approval. And they waited, and waited, and we waited, and waited. But it was just then that the Chinese government had just announced a new organization structure, where video game approvals were completely frozen, as they took even more steps to restrict the access minors get to video games, such as forcefully restricting the time they can play each day. After this announcement, Tencent shares lost 5% of their value, an estimated $20 billion United States dollars on the stock market the next day. The approvals freeze was lifted for a few months before being thrown in again, as Shield Mario Kart Wii continued in limbo entering 2019. It was around this time that Nintendo was able to release the Nintendo Switch through Tencent, while the Nvidia Shield reported really poor sales of the newly released Wii games. This wasn't good. In just 1 year, the amount of approvals were shrunken by 80%, and almost 20,000 video game companies filed for bankruptcy. The year after, in January 2020, Chinese state media announced that this stricter regulation was made to allow for better quality, although many gamers opposed this belief, claiming that it only pushed out mediocre content, much of it being shovelware mobile games. Meanwhile, Chinese Mario Kart Wii continued to wait going into 2021, and they continued to wait, and wait, until... In July 2021, all Nvidia Shield Wii games were taken down. The store pages for them were gone, and they could no longer be purchased or re-downloaded. They could still be played, as the game's license validation was still accessible, but that wouldn't be for long, as the validation server was shut down around February 2022, making all games completely unplayable, and lost yet again. What was once so exciting had flown away in less than 2 years. And of course, this means that the Chinese version of Mario Kart Wii has been completely finished, but left unreleased, not just once, but twice. This left a huge disappointment all around fans, who had been accepting a 13-year wait to finally be fulfilled, only for it to be thrown out yet again. To this day, although the Tencent Nintendo Switch continues to sell well, publishing games in China remains an absolute hell, and any chance of seeing anything related to the IQE is beyond dead. As it stands, the IQE has had an ill fate, and mystery of this unreleased system will continue forever. Or so we thought. In case you were living under a rock, 2020 was the year of the leaks. Years prior, a security researcher by the name of Samus Clark had managed to illegally breach Nintendo's internal network. he has obtained plenty of confidential Nintendo documents, prototypes, code, and whatnot. Although Samus is likely prohibited from accessing the internet after pulling that off, from May to December 2020, anonymous uploaders started gradually releasing parts of this leak, implying that Samus had provided parts of the leaks to other people. This was known as the GigaLeak era. The contents of this breach have not been released entirely, but plenty have been released in eventual parts. It was in September 2020 when it was the Wii's turn to get these major leaks. On the 2nd of September, after an IS of the legendary Wii startup disk was found, many IQ Wii fans who were hearing about all these news started wondering if this meant that the IQ Wii games could be leaked and found after all this time. And as more stuff continued to be found, this hope only continued to grow. Just a week after, on the 9th of September, there was another huge release with lots of internal documentation for Wii Sports Resort and Wii Fit Plus. There were plenty of IQ screenshots, but not much more had been found, as people continued to study and look through the files. Then a giant alarm was thrown after a rather interesting file was found. In case you don't know, what files are Wii content packets and, in most cases, channels. This turned out to be the IQ Wii's photo channel. 11 years later, we have found an IQ Wii channel. We started to lose our minds. The WAD was a bit broken, and that, combined with the fact that Dolphin did not support the Chinese region well, since it was never released, meant that it took forever to get it to run. But we did, and here it was in all its glory. This led people to wonder if there was any more IQ Wii content. Surely there had to be. It was then when my friend Shoko got an ISO from the leak, one we didn't get to work before, to actually run properly. It seemed to be a Wii startup disk that always failed installation no matter what. That was odd, but then we extracted the ISO to look at its files, and the rest is history. Although it took us plenty of months to get it to run properly, we now had in our hands most of the IQ Wii firmware. Our dream come true. The Wii menu and the Mii channel had a completely functional Pinion keyboard. The Wii menu firmware was 4.1C. It also contained a proper functional WAD of the photo channel. The Wii Shop channel was not finished yet, but it looks like the console may have been intended to release with this stop channel, telling you to update when they have it ready. And it only reads IQ Wii games from the Chinese region. Although it had to be through very unorthodox ways, we finally had much of the IQ Wii. And the best part? It all matched perfectly with the stuff we knew from looking at the files and from the Mario Kart ranking data. My friends Diego, Axel, and Eagle quickly grabbed their Wiis with WidMe support and managed to successfully install the IQ Wii firmware. While it wasn't the same as a truly released console, it was a perfect case of restored lost media, and the peak events in the 11 years of researching this console. And most importantly, running Korean Mario Kart shows the unused Chinese banner. Installing the Korean Mario Kart channel shows the unused Chinese banner, and installing Taiwanese Wi-Fi channel shows the unused Chinese banner. Which leads us to the next thing. Now all that remains are the games. As of writing, no IQ Wii games have been leaked. We have the Shield ones, a small bit of Chinese Mario Kart Wii, and some fan translations. Me and some friends have been working on making a reconstruction of the Chinese version of Mario Kart Wii that looks as closely as possible to what we have from the original, with the held up screen, the online Chinese region, and of course perfectly compatible with the leaked IQ Wii firmware. We also plan to make IQ versions working our way back from the Taiwanese games, since it shouldn't be too hard either. And my friend Diego has also converted many of the fan translations to work on the IQ Wii, burning them to DVD-R discs, even making cases from them. This is not, and will never be, the same as the genuine games being found, but it makes a lost console that had remained completely lifeless and mysterious for this long feel a bit more alive. As of the making of this video, we don't know if we will ever hear again from the IQ Wii. Maybe the games will be leaked someday, maybe we will see something like the Shield games again. But as of right now, this is where we stand. With 8 systems, 14 IQ player games, 8 GBA games, 6 DS games, 31 DSiWare titles, and 2 3DS games, IQ has left a legacy of releases, along with many more unreleased and lost to mystery. The company remains headquartered at the Suzhou Industrial Park, next to the Jinji Lake in Suzhou, which is a beautiful city notable for its plains and canals, causing it to be nicknamed the Venice of China. But to a small group of fans, it is notable for being the home place for one of the most interesting video game design and localization companies, and an important pillar in Nintendo history. IQ now merely localizes games for the global simplified Chinese translations on the Switch, but its past remains a never-ending mystery. Despite that, thankfully Nintendo now cares about Chinese much more than they did in the past. Chinese has had its turn, now it's time for Arabic languages to get their attention from Nintendo. Like Portuguese, which Nintendo has seemed to entirely abandon, or Arabic, which has got a talented fan translation community when Nintendo does not seem to care at all. This video has aimed to document the history of the efforts from a company, its fans, and the countless talented fan translators to bring a worldwide known video game company to the world's language with the most native speakers, pushing through an unfair approval system that has killed loads of projects. But the effort remained. When approvals refused, Chinese fans were covered by imports, custom translations, or hidden away in releases aimed to another region. Despite this, the future of gaming in China is largely dark and uncertain, as more restrictions are pushed, and less people will get to experience the magic that is a Nintendo video game. In my view, the true art in this story is the localization. Offering a product to feel like home in another country with another language is always a challenge, and here we have possibly hundreds of complete localizations that remain entirely lost to time. It had to be through someone pulling off an illegal practice that we found the IQ Wii's firmware, literally taking it from them, and through a preservationist project that we found the IQ GBA products. Tons of amazing translations where the localizers gave their whole souls, only to remain completely lost and for people to simply import a Japanese or American version. As of releasing this video, this year marks 20 years since IQ was originally founded, back on the 6th December 2002. And so, this has been a documentary of 20 years, not only of a glorious struggle to make Chinese gamers get what they deserve, but also from the whole world's Nintendo fans to discover and archive as much as possible from what is, truly, a huge chunk of lost Nintendo history. And I think all of us Nintendo fans should get together to archive as much as we can from this giant company's history. There is an immense amount of IQ stuff I have not mentioned here, so do feel free to investigate on your own. I highly recommend you to check out Chinese Nintendo, a fantastic Twitter account that posts tons of IQ trivia and that was essential for the making of this video. If you're interested in the IQ Wii, also check out our IQ Wii Archive YouTube channel, which features plenty of IQ Wii content, as well as Taiwanese releases and Wii fan translations from throughout the years. And finally, feel free to also join the IQ Brew Discord server, the main platform for a discussion of the IQ player and IQ in general. But for now, that's all I've got. I hope you liked it. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.